Shalom and welcome to today's Middle East Report. In this programme today we'll be discussing why it's so important as Christians that we should stand up for the one true democracy in the Middle East, that is the State of Israel. Warm welcome to the programme, and my guest for today's programme is Pastor Mike Fryer from Father's House and also Helen Darnell, also from Father's House. So welcome to the Middle East Report and welcome back,
Thank
Mike.
you, Simon. It's nice to be back with you. It's good to talk to you about Israel and the situation there. So thanks for inviting us.
No, it's a pleasure. Mike, would you just share with us some of the work that you've been doing with Father's House and some of the projects you've been involved in? I know that you've been to Germany recently on a fact-finding mission, essentially.
That's right. Well, I went with Shirley, who was doing some ministry over there, but I wrote a small book called Rose-Tinted Memory about Christian complicity in Holocaust, and I'm interested to see what the spiritual background of that is, and also the psychology of Christian anti-Semitism, which was at its height in Holocaust. So I went to Germany with Shirley, but predominantly for me, to look for old books on Christianity from the time of the Holocaust, and books by people like Gerhard Kittel, who was an anti-Semite, and Walter Grunman. And I managed to get those books, and some of those books, and look at their psychology, because it's very similar to the Christian anti-Semitism we see today in churches who call for BDS against Israel and call for Israel to be a two-state solution, two states with one state which has an intention of destroying Israel. So the psychology is very much the same. And looking at these books, these books that I've brought back from the old bookshops, I can see that it's a perverted Christianity that we see today in many Christian churches that are anti-Israel and are promoting hatred against Israel. And that's happening in exactly the same way as it did during Holocaust. So it's very important that we don't bury our history, but examine it so that we can learn from it and warn some of the leaders in the Christian community who are vilifying Israel and speaking in terms of hatred that will cause people like Hamas and Hezbollah and the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign to gain momentum with which to destroy Israel. So that's one of the reasons I went with Shirley so I could do my own research. And as we did in this country, we've buried our Christian anti-Semitism from pre-war years, and in Germany they've done the same. So it's very hard to find these books, but I managed to get some of them. This Bible, for instance, has 600 hymns in it, but the Bishop of Bremen during the Holocaust reduced it to 300 hymns because he took out every reference to Zion or Jerusalem or Bethlehem. And when we look at Gerhard Kittel and Grunman's books, we see that what he did, he Palestinianized Jesus, which is what's happening today. And he taught in his books and in the university in Jena that Jesus was an Aryan, and that actually, because he came from Galilee, he was a Gentile and not a Jew. And that's what's happening in churches today and in organizations, many Christian organizations that are teaching that Jesus was a Palestinian. Well, Yeshua, which is his proper name, was a Jew, obviously, and people are following these organizations like the Middle East, Embrace Middle East. Yeah. St. James Piccadilly is a good example of where vilification of Israel is taught by leaders, both from the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign and from within the church. So the psychology and the spiritual background is still there, and we need to bring it out into the open. And if anybody wants to examine it, and I've got a short book called Rose-Tinted Memory, which they can order on our website, and that teaches just a little bit about Christian complicity in German-occupied countries during the Holocaust.
And we've done a couple of programmes on this before, haven't we, Mike?
That's right. Absolutely. Very important.
Yeah. And Helen, it's great to have you on the Middle East Report. I know we've done one programme together. That's on my other programme, Politics Today. Yeah. But we're talking about Israel and the Middle East. So for our viewers, can you share with us how you came to faith in the Lord Jesus Christ and how he's given you this love for Israel and the Jewish people? Because you're only talking before the programme about how you were in Israel in May, and you want to make Aliyah.
Absolutely. I'm determined to find out I've got Jewish blood, and then I'll be there. So I came to faith when I was about 32. Just knew that God was calling me, really. So thought I need to get myself to a church. I need to get baptised. I did just that in a church in Birkenhead, and then I knew that God was calling me to a Sabbath congregation. I knew that I wanted to worship him on the correct, what I felt was the correct day and is the correct day. And I found Father's House Sabbath congregation through my parents, who were kind of attending there, and my sister as well became part of the church, and my life has just really made a real U-turn. I think I came to a place where I knew that I wasn't going to go forward if I didn't find God, and I didn't move on. And now my love for the Jewish people is just increased so much by learning from the pastors there, the teaching that we've received, and Bible study. I'm currently doing an End Times Bible study with Mike and a couple of others from the church, and it's just incredible just to find out, the situation in Israel. And then obviously I had the chance to go in May, which was the most incredible experience I've had. I mean, I cried most of the time. It was such an emotional journey for me and such a learning curve. And now I just want to go back and try and be there and hopefully maybe have some sort of ministry there. That's my goal eventually, if that's what God allows anyway.
Fantastic. So you're here also talking about your conference you've got, which is between the 4th and the 6th of August.
That's right.
And you've invited me to come up and speak. Do you know what you're letting yourself in for?
Yeah, we do. We've had you speaking before, and you're invited back, so it shows you're a good speaker. We're really blessed to have you coming back. We've got this conference from Friday night, from the beginning of the Sabbath on Friday night through till Sunday night, and the focus is to pray for Israel, and we've got probably one of the best advocates speaking on the Saturday night. This guy from London, this Simon Barrett guy, but also we've got this run which is going to take place. But the focus is to speak about the positive things that Israel do for the nations and in the Middle East, and to hear from you and where we are in terms of the political situation in regard to Israel, and more importantly, to pray for Israel. So we really want to gather people to pray for the nation that needs a lot of prayer in this time, because a lot of people are against it. Wrongly against it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Helen as well, you're a keen runner as well, so you've organised this 8-mile run, which you're going to kill me on, aren't you? Running up the hills up in North Wales, which are very steep. Not like down here, we don't have many hills.
Yeah. It's been a good experience, really, because I run, but I'm not always a hill runner. But it's just for us, it's an open expression, really, of support for Israel, and to thank them, really, for what they've done for us. So I think there's a lot of training happening at the moment, certainly with people in the church. We've got everyone involved, and obviously you're going to be there. So it's going to be an amazing experience, I think, just to be able to stand up and thank Israel, really, for what they've done for us, for what they've done for Europe and what they've brought to us, and bless them back as much as maybe just a little of what they've blessed us.
Fantastic, which is great. So we're talking about Israel, and it's a passion that all of us share, because the Lord's placed Israel upon our hearts and the Jewish people upon our hearts. But it's important that when we talk about Israel, and sadly many of those who advocate the church replacement theology position fail to recognise there's incredible biblical heritage with Israel, and to actually then not realise that today Israel is the fulfilment of biblical prophecy that were given to the prophets thousands of years ago, and has become real in our day and our generation, is something very special that we should treasure, isn't it?
Well, actually, it's a miracle of our lifetime that Jews, after 2,000 years of living in the nations, and now returning to Israel in their millions to live. And it's a fulfillment of Ezekiel 36, where God says that he will draw them back from the nations, from every corner of the earth, in order that the nations will know that there is a God in heaven. So Israel are a sign. This miracle is something the prophets, as you said, spoke about with immense passion. And sadly, the majority of churches don't even recognize the return of Israel or the fulfillment of the prophecies. And we're desperate that people will get on board and start to read prophets like Amos and Ezekiel and Isaiah and Joel and see that the return of Israel is this massive miracle in our generation. So we're blessed to be born at this time. And it's really important that we get that message out, because it fulfills our spiritual life with evidence that God is alive today, and he's doing what he said he was going to do. He's going to draw the Jews back to that land, and never again, according to Amos 9, will they be scattered again. So we've got to get on board with this, guys. And if you're in a church that don't teach about Israel, please start to ask your leaders to look at the biblical prophecies regarding the ingathering.
Absolutely. Let's go to a very good video in which is produced by the Israeli Foreign Ministry that gives us a short overview of the history of the land of Israel dating back to biblical times.
Everything started at noon today with a knock on the door. Who is it at this hour?
Who is it at this hour?
Two hipsters with well-groomed beards are at the door. Probably want to sell me an encyclopedia. Told them, hello, ever heard of Wikipedia? And slammed the door. Who are you anyway?
Hey, get out! Hey!
Well, you know, we ain't spoiled. The Assyrians took over the living room. So we settled for the bedroom. So it's now 750 BC. In about 2,750 years, we'll have some quiet here. We were just falling asleep when I heard the buzzer. A few more Assyrians have arrived. God knows from where. Assyria, maybe?
In the name of Nebuchadnezzar, king of all Babylonians, we claim this house for ourselves.
Actually, the kids' room is kind of awesome when you want some peace and quiet. You need a lot of patience when the Hellenists and the Romans pop up with no invite one after the other. A nice Greek told me, in the name of Alexander the Great.
We claim this a house.
So how do you say in Greek, how you doing? At least the Romans hooked us up with aqueducts, drainage, and running water. In the early Arabic era, they were really into music.
Come on, leave my stereo alone.
I don't remember installing that kind of buzzer. A guy with a blonde beard tells me he came in the name of Richard Lionheart. Oh, come on, dude, in the middle of Game of Thrones! We tried to find some peace and quiet, so I asked Rachel to check things out with the Crusaders, but she was like,
With Crusaders, these are Mamluks.
it's night soon, and I have no clue how long this whole thing's gonna last. Lucky for us, the Turks and the Ottoman Empire are in the house.
Turkish delight, anyone? Turkish delight?
And then it was quiet. Is it finally over? Has everyone left my house, my land of Israel?
Morning. In the name of the British Empire, we...
Claim this house for ourselves.
How could you have possibly known what I was about to say?
Well, we are living here for like 3,000 years.
So it didn't take long for that nice Brit to get it that this is not Europe.
Well, in the name of the League of Nations, we give you back your house. All you have to do is sign here, 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 and here. We can smash them today, love.
Finally, a state of our own in the land of Israel.
There you go, the history of Israel in a nutshell. Very humorous, but also I think makes an incredibly important point that the Jewish people have been in the land of Israel since time immemorial. And this has always been reflected through the scriptures. And even today, it's because of the Bible that the Jewish people are back in their ancient covenant homeland in the heart of the Middle East.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, it's their land at the end of the day, and it's actually quite heartbreaking to see that often they're pushed out and they're a nobody, they're not important anymore, they're God's people. And this is why we need to raise so much awareness about Israel and how they are so important to God, and why we need to be openly expressing our support as a church and as a people, because we need to be helping them, supporting them, teaching them, as much as they help and teach us and bless us, really.
And Mike, we look at Israel today, and I mean, Israel's at the forefront of technological advancements. It's breakthroughs in the fields of science, of technology, and helping nations around the world that are disadvantaged, that have problems growing crops they're producing, almost turning the desert to blossom, as it were, and being able to help other less well-off third world countries with their food production and agriculture and technology. I mean, and if you consider how many scientists there are, how many Israelis have PhDs, it's more than any other nation of the earth, considering how small Israel is. Isn't this a kind of modern miracle of the state of Israel?
Of course it is. God said that he was going to use Israel to bless the nations, and he's doing it. They're the second most innovative nation in the whole world, and they're only 65-year-old. The first is Switzerland, and they are second out of 138 nations that are measured as being innovative nations. And if you talk about irrigation for poor countries in Africa, they have micro irrigation where they take dew and irrigate plants in the desert. And you mentioned the desert will blossom, and that's clearly a scripture that is being fulfilled in Israel itself. But the Israelis are taking that technology out and helping in irrigation in India, in African countries, in South American countries. They're helping with desalination of seawater in Mexico. I mean, they're massively important, absolutely massively important in areas of irrigation and horticulture. But in terms of medicine, they are so important to us today. When I was a detective, I dealt with a lot of cot deaths, and that really pained me, because cot deaths are sad, aren't they? They're just, you don't know why this baby's died. And Israel today have, with their innovative skills, have created a mattress that actually monitors blood pressure, breathing, so that if a parent is at all worried, everything is measured as the baby sleeps, and the parent can have a good night's sleep, and this is preventing cot deaths. So in those areas of medicine, they're really important. And the same with the elderly, and in nursing homes, etc. These mattresses are used to measure blood pressure as the patient sleeps, so the nurse knows exactly what's happening. Now, we are soaking this sort of technology up in the West because we can't reach that level of innovation. And therefore, we are accepting Israel's gifts to us. And we can't afford to lose her. We can't afford to lose that technology, because it's helping our quality of life, not only here in the UK and the West, but throughout the African nations.
Yeah, and Helen, Israel have so many Nobel Peace Prize winners that have made a considerable contribution around the world, and to think that Israel, when we see a national emergency or an earthquake or tsunami, it's always, we see the Magen David Adom, the ambulance staff, Israel's emergency services, there first on the scene. And considering that Israel is a blessing to the nations, why do you think that in our time we're seeing so much hatred, just pure hatred being stirred up against Israel and the Jewish people, to the extent that particularly in Britain and in Europe that they're afraid?
I think it's just horrendous anti-Semitism that has been taught from youth, really, going back years and years. I think this is why, you know, we need to be educating people more and more about what Israel do and how important they are, certainly to us and many, many other countries as well. You know, they are a light to the nations, really. And so we, you know, why people are so terrible and disgusting about them is such a shame. It's so frustrating, because when we went to Israel and we could see how beautiful the people are over there and how free they are as well. You know, there's so much freedom in Israel. I can't understand where this hatred comes from, really. But it is something that's taught from a young age. And there's so much anti-Semitism, and that's why we hope to, you know, be a part of that, really, and try and change people's views about Israel, and obviously the work that you do here. So it's a blessing, really, to be a part of it and help people to understand how important they are to God and to the rest of the world, really.
Yeah, Mike, I don't want to get political, but you know, we recently just had a general election in which Theresa May just kind of scraped in to remain as Prime Minister. But the prospect of having someone like Jeremy Corbyn, who's the leader of the Labour Party, knowing that he is or was the former president of the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign, and he can't even mention the word Israel, and we see throughout the Labour Party there has been inquiry regarding the problem of anti-Semitism within the Labour Party, and to think that he could become our next Prime Minister. Shouldn't this be a wake-up call for Christians and others to realise that it's so important that we stand with Israel and the Jewish people today?
It is. The first thing I want to say, if I can, Simon, is to say that people of Helen's age who are passionate about Israel, she's absolutely passionate. And she's one of a number of people in our congregation and in the wider congregations of her age group who are the ones who are standing up for justice in the Middle East, for people to have human rights within the Middle East nations, although Israel is the only one that has human rights laws that are adhered to. And it's the young people who voted for Mr. Corbyn, because his charismatic, if you like, attempts at drawing young people in to vote for him for social justice issues makes him clearly a hypocrite when it comes to Israel, because he's talking about social justice for people in the UK, and we need that. Every nation has to have a standard of social justice, the highest standard possible. But when it comes to Israel, he vilifies Israel in a very subtle way, not wanting social justice for the Israelis. He doesn't want them to defend themselves when they are fired at by rockets from Hamas and Hezbollah in the north. And neither does he consider the social justice for the Arab people living in Gaza. You know, 51% of Arab women in Gaza are beaten up by their husbands in their homes. That's a certified statistic. In Gaza, women don't have the same respect in the courts. So if you're a woman giving evidence in court, the value of your evidence is only half of the value of evidence of a man. And women don't get jobs in Gaza. In fact, women are subhuman in Gazan society because of Hamas ideology. And Mr. Corbyn is supporting that. Now, when you talk about this inquiry, the Chakrabarty inquiry, I gave evidence on that Chakrabarty inquiry, and I gave evidence about anti-Semitism with two Labour Party people who were lecturers in university, lecturing to people of Helen's age in social services. And I was able to give evidence of anti-Semitism. That evidence was not considered. That inquiry by Chakrabarty was a sham, and actually the vice investigator who I gave evidence to is actually anti-Israel. I also am concerned about the young people getting involved in the movement called Momentum within the Labour Party, because Momentum is filled with people who are passionate for human rights, for rights of women, for rights for ordinary working people. And I'm passionate about that as well. But these are young minds, young people who are in this organisation called Momentum and being fed by the leadership of the Labour Party that Israel is an occupying, aggressive regime. That's not true. Actually, the people they're supporting, Hamas and Hezbollah, who Corbyn calls his friends, they're the ones who are restricting human rights, not Israel. Helen's just been to Israel. She says it's free. You know, freedom of religion, freedom to say what you want to say, freedom for women, freedom for whatever politics you're in. You can't have that in Gaza. You know, if you go to Gaza and say you're a Christian, immediately you're oppressed. If you're in Gaza and you're a young woman just a young woman who wants to work in the law or work in education, you can't do it. Men can't teach girls in the education system in Gaza. So where are the rights there? And yet Mr. Corbyn is supporting that regime. The motive behind it, and I have to say, the motive behind it is anti-Semitism. And because they're drawing in this movement called Momentum, these young people, actually what they're doing is they're teaching very subtly anti-Semitism. And we're getting situations now where people like Luciana Berger, the Jewish MP, is having a really hard time. She had over 2,000 hate mails at one period. Momentum are trying to get rid of balanced Labour MPs, those who are supportive of Israel. Momentum don't want them in, and it's because they believe that Israel is a fascist society. And why do they believe that? Because people like Mr. Corbyn encourage that belief. So for me, if we continue on a road where we're increasing that teaching of hatred amongst the young people, we're sowing into a future for this nation under Mr. Corbyn maybe, where Israel will become a state which will be attacked again by the nations of the world. So it's very dangerous, very dangerous.
Absolutely. And this year is also the 10th anniversary in which Hamas took power in Gaza by overthrowing the ruling Fatah Party of Gaza, including throwing many members of the Palestinian Authority off roofs and buildings. So let's have a look now at the last 10 years of Hamas's rule in Gaza. Gives us some understanding against the threats that Israel face. Where are the big demonstrations being organised against Hamas and the way that they are oppressing their fellow Palestinians in Gaza? I don't think there is any. Helen, looking at that and realising the neighbourhood that Israel's in, particularly posed by Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in southern Lebanon and north, very strong elements within the Palestinian Authority as well. And Israel's had to deal with this threat of terrorism now for absolute decades. But to have a terror organisation controlling the Gaza, and now we just finished the 10th anniversary of Hamas's rule in Gaza. Why do you think we're not seeing any protests against the oppressive nature of Hamas's regime? And where are the cries to defend women's rights and freedoms that Israel has compared that of Gaza?
I just think there's a very strong oppression, really. As Mike mentioned earlier, there's a strong oppression, and I think the Hamas and Hezbollah, they are able to brainwash many people. Certainly in the UK, we've believed so many lies of these areas, and have believed that the lies that have progressed and got bigger and bigger and bigger, and so the women now have no rights, and that's another reason why I would like to run, really, on behalf of the women. It's an opportunity for me, who has so much freedom in this country, to be able to fight for those women that don't have the same. As Israel, they allow their women to do whatever they like. They're allowed to go into education, they're allowed to do sports, they're allowed to teach. But obviously many countries in the Middle East aren't able to do that. So for me to be able to do this run and take part on behalf of those women, really, and say, Israel is a freedom, an area of freedom, and be able to support that is an amazing opportunity. I just think that there's so much brainwashing, so much lies, so many lies that are spread across so many nations and so many countries by the likes of these terrorist organisations, and obviously Jeremy Corbyn as well, and many other leaders, really, in government. They have no idea what Israel does, and as one lie is told, another lie is told, and another lie is told, and another cover-up, and another cover-up. And it's just total disrespect to Israel, and that's why we have to be a light, don't we?
Absolutely, of course. And, Mike, when we talk about Israel, it's so important, isn't it, that our nations understand God's plan and purposes for his land and his people. And essentially, if we as a nation are to receive God's blessing and his protection, then we need to align ourselves with the one true democracy in the Middle East, which is the State of Israel, because this is essentially God's foreign policy. If we defend his people, he will protect us. If we're against his people, then all those curses that are aimed at Israel will come to us.
Well, you're absolutely right. Yeah, I hadn't heard that term, God's foreign policy, but it's a really good phrase to coin. It is God's policy that if we bless Israel, we'll be blessed. And historically, the UK has been an aggressor against the Jewish people. There's no doubt that we've spawned hatred. And then we had a period in the 20th century, early 20th century, under people like David Lloyd George and Balfour and those, who were Christian men who believed in the biblical prophecy. And as a result of that, I think that we prospered spiritually because we had the revivals in those periods. People came back to godly ways, etc. And there was less crime in those periods of time. But now we're in a situation again where our government we're not sure where they are with Israel at the moment. Theresa May is trying to work with Israel and blessing Israel, but she's not got the support to do that within the wider Parliament. And I think if our parliamentarians were to get hold of the fact that actually if we support Israel and bless Israel, God would start to come back, put his hand back on the United Kingdom and bless us. And it would be, we'd have so many blessings if that would happen, because it's a as you say, God's foreign policy, and you're absolutely right.
So let's have a look at this report now that looks, this entitled Made in Israel, and looks at some of the incredible technological breakthroughs that the nation of Israel have made in so many different fields, including IT. And if we're going to progress as a nation, particularly in the 21st century, then we're going to need Israeli know-how.
On April 15, 2013, 2 bombs exploded during the Boston Marathon, killing 3 people and injuring 264 others. For the next 3 days, investigators reportedly used a high-tech system called BriefCam to analyze local surveillance video. Hours of video are condensed into minutes, and experts can zoom in on suspicious actions, like a backpack being left behind. BriefCam's video synopsis was instrumental in identifying the 2 bombers, and the technology was made in Israel.
Technology is going to change all of our lives. It already has, and what's coming down the pike is going to be even more intense.
Israel has often been called the startup nation. And while Jerusalem may be the spiritual heart of the country, Tel Aviv is the center of its startup success. Just a century ago, this thriving city was little more than a series of sand dunes. Today, it's been voted the 2nd best high-tech center in the world, just after Silicon Valley.
Israel was recently ranked the 4th most innovative nation in the world, from the iPhone to the PlayStation. Many of the ideas behind your favorite gadgets came from inventors right here in Israel.
Flip-top cell phones, keyboards for smartphones, Intel Pentium chips, the ability to print straight from your computer, the flash drive, the chip in the iPad, the OS that runs the Amazon Kindle, the chip that controls the Sony PlayStation, and the 3D sensor in the Xbox Kinect. Every year, American companies are shelling out more and more shekels to buy small Israeli startups. The latest example is Waze, an Israeli smartphone app that gives live traffic reports based on your location. It warns users about traffic jams, accidents, and even sitting police cars. In 2011, Waze made headlines by helping drivers navigate the LA traffic jam known as Carmageddon. 2 years later, Google bought the program for just under $1 billion, making it the most expensive app in history.
I think the key challenge for Israeli companies now is to go from startup nation to scale-up nation. We need to build bigger companies, not just sell them early to American multinationals, but to actually get them bigger, to get them into the sales process, and to create more jobs both here and in America and around the world.
So what gives Israel its technological edge? We asked some of the country's most prominent business leaders, and the answer is, there's no single answer.
Chutzpah is perhaps the most definitive Jewish word. Very, very hard to translate. Gall, unrelenting daring, this ability to try to do something which nobody else has done before, to say something which is a little bit out of place, to be in someone's face. That chutzpah is what allows us to actually break the boundaries and to break the rules and to go out of our comfort zone in order to create new things. There's a joke about what is the Jewish answer? It's a question, right? In other words, Jews will answer a question with a question.
That culture of challenging and debating and arguing, it's everywhere in Israel. Arguing is healthy because you get to better answers, you get to better results. And I think that is a key cultural attribute in Israel's economic success story and its economic miracle.
Our roots, our education, maybe even that it's coming from the Talmud, is always being skeptical and asking questions. And I believe this tradition, this culture, it's a part of our DNA.
Whether you call it the Socratic method or the Talmudic method, you choose it. That's a big part of how we learn and how we teach our kids. If you were looking for a single group to basically make your ideal pool of entrepreneurs, you couldn't look for a better group than immigrants. Immigrants make great entrepreneurs because they already did it in their own lives. They were the CEO of MyLife.com. They took risk, they moved to a foreign country, they had to handle legal and facilities and HR to get jobs and banking and marketing, and they basically had to scale up innovation, has a direct correlation to diversity. If you all think alike, you all act alike, I'm sorry, it's not going to be a particularly creative place.
In Jewish life, parents always advocated to the kid that he has to learn and also that he has to venture if he wants to succeed. I always say that the secret source of the Israeli high-tech is the Jewish mother who asked her son at the age of 7, after all what we have done for you, asking you for one Nobel Prize, is it really too much?
Yossi Vardi is known as the godfather of Israel's high-tech industry. He's invested in more than 80 internet startups, including a company started by his son.
Came with 3 of his friends. I gave them the money. I didn't have much of an idea what they are going to do. But still, I gave them the money. They created this unbelievable product, and the rest is history, as they say.
That unbelievable product was ICQ, the world's first instant messaging service. Less than a year later, America Online bought the company for $400 million.
Very hard to extract the DNA of success. You have to understand, if you venture, you cannot do only successes, because if you are trying to be involved in an area where there are only successes, you are not taking risks. So failure comes with the territory.
Failure is not a 4-letter word the last time I looked. Failure is part of the process. Not every team wins every game, but you gotta try, and if you fail, you gotta learn from your mistakes and then pick yourself up and do it right again.
Are the failure rates lower in Israel than they are in the rest of the world? And they're not. Israelis don't fail any less. The difference is they just keep trying.
People don't understand, for example, if you're presented the choice of investing in 2 entrepreneurs, one who's actually never tried it before, one who's tried and failed. Always take the guy who has tried and failed. Your statistical odds of getting a return on your investment are far better with that person.
Sadly, how many people know about Israel's incredible success when it comes to IT and how all our modern gadgets are as a result of Israeli technology and design? I have to say, Helen, for young people, that's not really an image of Israel that they get or understand. And, you know, you've just come back from Israel, and the one thing that I love about Israel, it's such a dynamic nation. And for young people, it's a fantastic nation. So why is Israel not perceived like this?
No idea. The answer, as that guy said, is there's no answer, really. It's such a shame, you know, when you go to Israel and you see the type of people that they are, how driven and focused and family orientated, and how they just keep getting up and keep getting up no matter how much they're kicked and how much they're kicked down, they keep getting up. You know, they're so passionate, and they're really clever people. They want to do well. They're so driven to do that. And I just don't think our nation understands that at all. I had a conversation with somebody in work quite recently, and they had no idea where Israel ranked in terms of technology and medical, and actually we had a bit of a quite heated debate on it, to be honest, because he had absolutely no idea where they were in the rankings, and I got some facts and figures for him, and still nothing. And it was almost like, I mean, he's quite a bit younger than me, it was almost like his generation just has no idea. And I was the same until I learned, and it is an education game again, and we have to be taught about what Israel does, and there's just not enough out there letting us know. I mean, if you want to boycott Israel, you might as well literally throw out everything in your house, throw out your phones, throw out your computers, throw out your iPads, throw out your Bible. You know, if you're going to boycott Israel, then, you know, be careful, because you'll have to throw out most things. So it's a shame, really. And again, education and teaching people about what Israel do and how driven and focused. We can learn a lot from Israel. We can learn a lot from the Jewish nation. I certainly have, from just being there and how they're so focused. So yeah, it's just a shame, and there is no answer, really.
And Mike, you know, when we look at Israel today, I mean, we realise that Israel is the only one true democracy in the Middle East. It's the only place where there is real freedom of religion, to the extent that Christianity is the only place in Israel that is flourishing is in Israel and across the Middle East. You know, Israel has a robust legal system. where even a former Prime Minister has been prosecuted, a Supreme Court, also combined with many other factors as well that makes Israel a special nation. How do we communicate this to a younger generation that believe the lies and the misinformation about Israel? And how can we get them to see Israel beyond the parapet of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and realise that this is a special place? God's hand is upon this nation, and it's an incredible nation.
I think it's important, as Helen quite rightly said, to educate our young people and to inform our young people as to the technology in all areas. I mean, just we looked at Waze there on that clip and how that sat-nav can prevent accidents actually happening. And it's an amazing piece of technology. And the solar power technology, this Pythagoras solar panel, that is actually a window in your home now that provides energy, it provides heat, and it also provides light in your home. I mean, the Israelis just don't stop at a solar panel on your roof. They take it to the nth degree. And then if you compare that with what's happening over the wall in Gaza, where in 2016 there were 27 honor killings of women, and Israel are in the middle of these warring nations. So you get Saudi Arabia warring with Yemen, and Iraq and Iran, and they're warring nations, and you've got this little democracy which is producing all these good things for humankind. I think we have to enter that debate to our schools. We have to put it in there, in our A-level curriculums. Where are these things made? Where is this computer made, as Helen has said? Where are your phones made? And actually do that, but we need to have politicians to drive this understanding, because if our young people would only get a grip on the fact that Israel is the only peaceable, as you say, democratic, innovative nation in the middle of these warring nations in the Middle East, then we as a nation would then begin to hunger for trade, more trade with Israel, and we'll get more benefits, and therefore our society will be enhanced by the quality of products that come into us, not only just technology, but food. I mean, Israel have just produced tomatoes that don't rot in shipping. So you can ship them all over the world, and we can have amazing produce in our shops that is not rotting. We're not wasting food. So they're looking at all sorts of things that our young people will benefit from. How we get our politicians to focus on that is another matter. I think we've got to write to our politicians. Keep contacting them. I'm always speaking to our politicians, my own MP, and he's actually listening, and he's often writing on our behalf to the Foreign Office. He wrote last week to Boris Johnson on this issue of education in Palestinian schools, Palestinian Arab schools in Gaza and in Judea and Samaria, because they're teaching Arab children that Israel doesn't exist. So my MP has now written to Boris Johnson about that to say, well, listen, we can't support this. So education is a key, because the opposition to Israel are being educated that Israel is an occupying force and a fascist state. We have to tell the truth. Now, you may have ideas about that, and you may have ideas, but the simple fact is that we have to force our politicians to do something. What greater thing in our universities than to teach those people who are going into the technology industry that actually, if most of this technology is Israeli, go and see what's happening in Israel. Go out there. Let's not go on a political trip to Ramallah to make out that there are refugees there. Let's go and see what Israel are doing in their technology, in their hospitals. Hadassah Hospital is one of the greatest hospitals in the world. Let's send our medical students there. Let's bring this information back to our nation.
Absolutely. Yeah, well said there, Mike. Very good. We're down to the last few minutes, so I need to talk about the conference a little bit before we go. What can our viewers expect, Helen, if they turn up for this weekend conference to celebrate everything that's good about Israel and to pray for Israel, but also those that are brave enough or mad enough to join you on the 8-kilometre run?
I think for the summer gathering, the teaching in general, the teaching, the worship, the fellowship, we're going to have some fun. I think the run itself is obviously on the Sunday, the 6th. It's going to be a difficult run, but I know that it's going to be a fun time as well. We've got some children taking part as well, and it's uphill, downhill, so it's going to be fine. We've just got a really exciting weekend coming up, really, and I think just to know that we're doing it in support of Israel and to just encourage anybody else that can take part in it. And if there isn't people that can come to North Wales, if they're not close enough, we're encouraging people to take part in their homes. Even if they can't go out of the house, walk around your house for an hour. We're starting at 11. Maybe go for a run in their own area if they're not able to get to North Wales. But hopefully, if we can encourage as many to come and join us, it's going to be a really great weekend.
Absolutely. And Mike, how can our viewers get in touch with yourself and with Father's House if they're living up in North Wales or in the Northwest to come along?
Well, they can ring us at the office. They can go onto our website, www.fathershouse.wales. It's on your screen. They can contact Becky, our admin officer, and Carol, who's doing the bookings. Just ring us. We're a family church. We're not, just get in touch with us, and we can put you into the right place. We can take you to the start and put you in touch with Helen, and then you can run with her or you can walk behind her. I'm not sure who's going to win this race, whether it's going to be Helen or Simon. But
I'm too old.
But if you're a good runner, then maybe you can beat both of them. But if you're not a runner, if you're not a good runner, you can go along and just jog behind them. And if you can't get there, as Helen has said, try and run for Israel with an Israeli flag in your town or your village or your street, and just show support for this wonderful nation. I can only encourage you, though, to come to North Wales because it's absolutely beautiful. Your wife's from there.
Absolutely.
And she would say that. So, and you'll see this amazing man and this amazing woman running on the hills in Wales and supporting Israel. So that, for me, is really exciting. If you're not a runner at all, just come and meet them at the finish line with your Israeli flags. Just come and let us know that you're coming. Contact us at the church, and that'll be great.
Mike and Helen, thank you so much for being my guest on today's Middle East Report. Thank you for coming all the way down from lovely North Wales to join me here in London for this programme.
Thank you, Simon.
And keep up the good work that you're doing.
Thank you.
And I just want to thank you for watching today's Middle East Report. Both Mike and Helen are special people who have a tremendous love for Israel and the Jewish people. And if you are in the Northwest or you're in Wales, I just really recommend a weekend conference for Israel so that you will be equipped theologically and politically to stand with Israel and the Jewish people in our day, because we know that the Messiah of Israel, Yeshua HaMashiach, is returning to Jerusalem. So we'll leave you with this beautiful song that is Emmanuel.
Glory to God, peace on earth, goodwill to all men. Here with the angels we sing. And as He reigns from above, may He reign in our hearts, our sovereign Lord and King. Oh, Emmanuel. Oh, Emmanuel, oh, Emmanuel, God with us. faith.